Okay, how's it going, everybody? So we're going to read some more Jenny Marx today. Let's see. This is going to be we're going to read part 5 of the or article number 5 on the Irish question by Jenny Marx, released in 1870. So we'll go ahead and get into this. Yeah, this is released London, March 22nd. So we'll get into it. There is a London weekly with a wide circulation among the mass of the people, which is called Reynolds Newspapers. This is what it has to say about the Irish question. Quote, "Now we are regarded by the other nations as the most hypocritical people on earth. We blew our own trumpets so loudly and so joyfully and exaggerated the excellence of our institutions so much that now, when our lies are being exposed one by one, it is not at all surprising that other people should ridicule us and ask themselves whether it could be possible. It is not the people of England who have brought about such a state of affairs, because the people also have been tricked and deceived. The blame lies with the ruling classes and a venal, parasitic press." End quote. The coercion bill for Ireland, which was introduced on Thursday evening, is a detestable, abominable, execrable measure. This bill extinguishes the last spark of national liberty in Ireland and silences the press of this unhappy country in order to prevent its newspapers from protesting against the policy, which is the crying disgrace of our time. The government wants its revenge on all those newspapers which did not greet its wretched land bill with transports of the light, and will get it. In effect, the Habeas Corpus Act will be suspended, because from now onwards it will be possible to imprison. It will be possible to imprison for 6 months or even for life any person who cannot explain his behavior to the satisfaction of the authorities. Ireland has been put at the mercy of a band of well-trained spies who are euphemistically referred to as detectives. Not even Nicholas of Russia ever published a crueler case against the unfortunate Poles than this bill of Mr. Gladstone's against the Irish. It is a measure which would have won Mr. Gladstone the good favor of the famous King of Dahomey. Nevertheless, Mr. Gladstone had the colossal effrontery to boast in front of Parliament and the nation of the generous policy which his government is proposing to adopt with regard to Ireland. At the end of his speech on Thursday, Gladstone even went as far as producing expressions of regret pronounced with a sanctimonious, lachrymose solemnity, worthy of the Reverend Mr. Stiggins. But snivel as he may, the Irish people will not be deceived. We repeat that the bill is a shameful measure, a measure worthy of Castlereagh, a measure which will invoke the condemnation of all free nations on the heads of those who invented it, and those who sanction and approve it. Finally, it is a measure which will bring well-deserved opprobrium to Mr. Gladstone, and we sincerely hope lead to his swift defeat. And how has the demagogic minister, Mr. Bright, been able to keep silent for 48 hours? We state without hesitation that Mr. Gladstone has proved to be the most savage enemy and the most implacable master to have crushed Ireland since the days of the notorious Castlereagh. As if the cup of ministerial shame were not already full to overflowing, it was announced in the House of Commons on Thursday evening, the same evening as the coercion bill was introduced, that Burke and other Fenian prisoners have been tortured to the point of insanity in the English prisons. In the very face of this appalling evidence, Gladstone and his jackal Bruce were protesting that the political prisoners were treated with all possible care. When Mr. Moore made this sad announcement to the House, he was constantly interrupted by hoots of bestial laughter. Had such a disgusting and revolting scene taken place in the American Congress, what a howl of indignation would have gone up from us. Up till now, the Reynolds News, the Times, the Daily News, Pall Mall, the Telegraph, etc., have greeted the coercion bill with shouts of wild joy, particularly the measure for the destruction of the Irish press. And all this is taking place in England, the acknowledged sanctuary of the press. But isn't there a case, after all, wanting revenge on these new writers? You will agree that it was too hard to watch the Irishmen each Saturday demolish the tissue of lies and calumny, which these Penelopes worked on for 6 days of the week, with sweat of their own brows. And that is quite natural that the latter should give a frantic welcome to the police, who come to tie the hands of their formidable enemy. At least these fine fellows realize their own collective worth. A characteristic exchange of letters has taken place between Bruce and Mr. McCarthy Downing concerning Colonel Richard Burke, before reproducing it, I should like to remark in passing that Mr. Downing is an Irish member of the House of Commons. This ambitious advocate joined the ministerial phalanx with the noble aim of making a career. Thus, we are not dealing here with a suspect witness. February 22nd, 1870. Sir, if my information is correct, Richard Burke, one of the Fenian prisoners formerly held in Chatham Prison, has been transferred to working in a state of insanity. In March 1869, I took the liberty of bringing his state of apparent ill health to your notice. In the following July, Mr. Blake, former member of Waterford, and I informed you of our opinion that if the system of his treatment were not changed, the worst consequences were to be feared. I received no reply to this letter. My object in writing to you is the cause of humanity and the hope of attaining his release, so that his family may have the consolation of seeing to his needs and mitigating his suffering. I have in my hand a letter from the prisoner to his brother, dated December 3rd, in which he says that he has been systematically poisoned, this being, I imagine, one of the phases of his disease. I sincerely trust that the kind sentiments for which you are well known will urge you to grant this request. Yours, etc., McCarthy Downing, Home Office. This is February 25th, 1870. I believe this is in response, maybe. Yeah, this is between H.A. Bruce and McCarthy Downing. Okay. February 25th, 1870. Sir, Richard Burke was transferred from Chatham as a result of his illusion that he was poisoned or cruelly treated by the prison medical officers. At the same time, without him being positively ill, his health deteriorated. Consequently, I gave orders for him to be moved to Woking, and had him examined by Dr. Meyer from Broadmoor Asylum, who was of the opinion that his illusion would disappear when his health improved. His health did, in fact, improve rapidly. An ordinary observer would not have noted any signs of his mental weakness. One second. His mental weakness. Where'd it go? I should very much like to be in a position to give you an assurance of his early release, but am not able to do so. His crime and the consequences of the attempt to free him are too serious for me to be able to give you such an assurance. Meanwhile, all that medical science and good treatment can do to restore his mental health and physical health will be done. H.A. Bruce. February 28, 1870. Sir, after receiving your letter of the 25th in reply to my request that Burke should be handed over to the care of his brother, I hope to find an occasion to talk to you on this matter in the House of Commons. But you were so busy on Thursday and Friday that an interview was out of the question. I have received letters from a number of Burke's friends. They are waiting anxiously to hear whether my request has been successful. I have not yet informed them that it has not. Before disappointing them, I felt justified in writing to you again on the matter. I thought that as a person who has invariably and at some risk denounced Fenianism, I could permit myself to give a word of impartial, friendly advice to the government. I have no hesitation in saying that the release of a political prisoner who has become mentally imbalanced would not be criticized and certainly not condemned by the general public. In Ireland, people would say, quote, well, the government is not as cruel as we thought, end quote. Quote, whereas if, on the other hand, Burke is kept in prison, this will provide new material for, is that a quote too? Yeah, whereas if, on the other hand, Burke is kept in, okay, I'm sorry. Well, the government is not as cruel as we thought, end quote. I thought this was a quote here, but maybe not. Whereas if, on the other hand, Burke is kept in prison, this will provide new material for the national press to attack it as being crueler than the Neapolitan governors in their worst days. And I confess that I cannot see how men of moderate views would defend the act of refusal in such a case. McCarthy Downing. Sir, I regret that I am unable to recommend Burke's release. It is true that he has shown signs of insanity and that in ordinary cases I would be justified in recommending him the mercy of the Crown. But his case is not an ordinary one, because he was not only a hardened conspirator, but his participation in the attempt to blow up Clerkwell, which, if it had succeeded, would have been even more disastrous than it was, makes him an improper recipient of pardon. H.A. Bruce. Could anything be more infamous? Bruce knows perfectly well. Okay, so this is back to Jenny Marx. Could anything be more infamous? Bruce knows perfectly well that if there had been the slightest suspicion against Colonel Burke, During the trial concerning the attempt to blow up Clerkenwell, Burke would have been hung next to Barrett, who was sentenced to death on the testimony of a man who had previously given false testimony against 3 other men. And in spite of the evidence of 8 citizens who made the journey from Glasgow to prove that Barrett had been there when the explosion had taken place, the English had no scruples. Mr. Bruce can confirm this, when it is a question of hanging a man, especially a Fenian. But all this spate of cruelty cannot break the iron spirit of the Irish. They have just celebrated their national holiday, St. Patrick's Day, more demonstratively than ever in Dublin. The houses were decorated with flags saying, quote, "Ireland for the Irish, liberty, and long live the political prisoners." And the air rang with the sound of their national songs and the Marseillaise. Okay. So, that's chapter 5. Next is going to be chapter 6. It's agrarian outrages in Ireland, and we'll get to that. But that was Article 5. This is Jenny Marx's 5th article on the Irish question. Thank y'all for tuning in. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Tumblr, Medium, all these Marxists saw. Hit me up there. Y'all have a great day, and Dodada Goi.